tonight. I'm Terry Campbell. I'm the Adult Program Coordinator here at the library. Before we get started, I want to invite you to come back next Thursday. We've invited Michelle Nichols from the Adler Planetarium. She's their master educator, and she'll be talking about the science of climate change. And she told me it's all science, no politics. So please join us next Thursday, April 25th at 7 o'clock. Tonight's program is in partnership with the Prospect Heights Natural Resource Commission. Raise your hand if you're a volunteer or commissioner. Thank you. They're always looking for more volunteers, and there's a card up here if you want to learn more information. Tonight, our speaker is Terry Miesle. He's a flavor chemist and a citizen science, and we're going to learn about chasing the rusty-patched bumblebee. So please welcome Terry Miesle.
We can get the lights down a little bit. And I need to turn the microphone on. All right. Like I said, my name is Terry Miesle. I do some monitoring work. Actually, let me bump it up here. I do some monitoring work at Fermilab and a couple other places, but formally at Fermilab, where I report data back upstream to the Fermilab natural areas there. And as part of that, we've been looking for the Bombus affinis, the rusty-patched bumblebee, which was recently added to the endangered species list. And it had been known for quite some time that it had been in decline. So that was a primary thing that we were looking for out there. At Fermilab, there was a records going back to '93 of sightings of this bee, but very spotty work had been done through the years. So part of what I was doing was getting out there where areas where they're likely to be and seeing if I can find them. And then taking pictures of everything else I can find. And leading tours and all this other stuff. And it's really nice to see a lot of people out there. I'm part of a group called the Native Bee Awareness Initiative. I joined them after meeting them at the Wild Things Conference back in 2015. I started recording bumblebees at home, though, going back all the way to 2000. And part of that is really a start of citizen science when we bought our house there and started noticing all the sort of things that were there. And if you want IDs here, the butterfly is an American snout. It's on some quinine. And there are two bees on this one. This is a Ceratina. It's a male. This is a male as well. It's a little Lasioglossum, and they're in spring beauties. So in a couple of weeks here, maybe within a week, we'll be starting to see the spring beauties bloom. And get out and have a look. There's all kinds of little tiny bees that are on them. There we go. Field work, a lot of people, you know that field work has a lot of times been done by amateurs. There aren't enough professional scientists that can get out and spend all their time out there. There's always a load of people that are willing to help. And the whole key to that is gaining some expertise and then getting the data back. The data is important. So I contribute to a bunch of places you can see here. I'd like to remind people that data is useful even if it's not systematic. You don't have to set out plots and monitor 1 square meter here, 1 square meter there. You can get out there and just see what you can see. And a lot of times it's knowing when to find stuff and where to find stuff. With bees, it's easy. You go to where the flowers are. Some more bees. This is I cannot remember her name, but this is a specialist. This is a pollen specialist on spring beauties. Some bees are what they call oligospecialists, or maybe they'll a couple other words, but they draw their pollen from just a couple sources. They may draw nectar from a lot of different places, but they need pollen from just a few things. This is a prairie cicada, and that's a fragile fork-tailed damselfly with lunch. I'll tell you a little story. Last year, we were trying to get back out and find the rusty-patched bumblebees. And this is along a section of prairie at Kirk Road, the Prairie 16. If you drive down Kirk Road by Fermilab, this is just south of the Pine Street entrance. It hadn't been burned for a number of years, and they burned it the year before, or very early in this year. So it was really interesting to see what was going to come up and if there were some flowers that were going to be useful for them. Bees kind of like a certain period. They don't like it when it's super windy. It's tough for them to manage their flying at that point. And it needs to be sunny, because when it's sunny, that's when the plants are providing nectar. And I've recently learned a lot of these ones are probably offering nectar earlier in the morning than I get out there. So this year I'm going to try to get out there at like 6 in the morning and see what I can get, 6 or 7 before work, if I can manage that. It was a really gorgeous day out there. Late July, it should be a perfect time for them. Bumblebees are at the kind of early peak of the season at this point. It should be full of workers. You can see the bergamot blooming and the false sunflowers are blooming there. So these are great resources for them, and I should find a lot of stuff. There's always birds keeping an eye on me, warblers and other things. If I get too close to them, they let me know and I back off a little bit. So I see a bee here. This is not a Bombus affinis. It's a Bombus impatiens. It's probably our most common bumblebee, especially later in the season. But it's on rattlesnake master, so I know I'm onto something. At least the flowers I know are offering resources at that time of year, or at that time of the day. So I'm going to keep going along. This one's a little tricky. You can see she's got, or he I think, has got some brown here. So, maybe, but this is a different one. This is Bombus gricicolis. So I'm going to keep looking around. I'll record the data and keep moving. This is promising. And she's on these bee balm flowers here, these monarda. And I have to get closer and have to get better pictures because this isn't good enough. And so this is a little bit closer for her. Now you can see, you can see the brown belt here from the rusty patch. And that's a good shot. That's another good shot. This is probably an ideal shot for this species because I can see her head, I can see the thorax, I can see the markings here. So that was great. I immediately get send a text message off to a couple people. Hey, I found one. They're here. So they're like, where? And so we get out and we found a few more sightings. People around Fermilab in their gardens started getting reports of them as well. I found them at home as well. So we're doing pretty good last summer. I want to talk to you just a little bit about ecology and biology of bees. So how many people, yeah?
Before you leave that first part, what
Yeah.
exactly is she doing?
This one is just getting nectar. Right, so it is...
From the flower, the bee balm flower she's on.
Right. I think this is actually, this is a female. She's getting nectar out of the flower here. You can see her tongue right there. So she's licking down in. The pollen is actually down in these florets, so she'd have to get down inside to get the pollen.
So what is she going to do with the nectar? How is she going to?
Yeah, I'm going to go through a little bit of the ecology here. Yeah, the nectar is their energy source. Right, the adults need to eat some pollen, but mostly they need fuel because being a bumblebee takes a lot of energy. It takes more energy than a hummingbird. Their physiology, their what's the word I'm looking for? Metabolism is extremely high. They can maintain their body temperatures about 30 degrees above ambient, which means once it hits 90, 95 degrees, they can't operate. That's too hot for them. Bumblebees are a temperate species. There are even species of bumblebees like, Bombus polaris, that is only above the Arctic Circle. So that's what they're doing. Very short period up there, very short time, so it's small nests, but they're up there. I was going to ask how many people know what a bee is. Yeah, and it's important to remember bees are essentially vegetarian wasps. They're an offshoot of one group of the wasps, and they were a hunting group of the wasps. So they would go out gathering resources, taking it home to feed their young. And you can see there are a lot of different wasp families, and the bees and ants split off of this one group down here. Most of the ones we're familiar with are say, the vespids. They're your paper wasps and what we call yellow jackets and such. Those are all your vespid type wasps. The rest of them, some of them are parasitic, where they lay their eggs in or on another insect, or they can be what we say predatory, where they subdue a prey and take it home, lay an egg on it, and turn it into more wasps. There are 7 groups of bees. 6 of them we have in this region. The one group we're all most familiar with is this one. But we have relatives of all of these except this group here, which is Australia and New Zealand. You're going to see a lot of these coming out very, very soon. The andrinas, they're already emerging. On the maple flowers and anything that's blooming now, look at it, they'll be buzzing around up there. The Calides will be coming out very soon. That divergence out of the bee group took place about 100 million years ago, and it drove flower development. There are still wasps that eat and even feed their young pollen. And that's the group that this was. They were doing that. They were collecting pollen before there were real flowers. Think of pine trees and such, where you've got those pollen bodies on them, grasses and such. It's a good food source. It doesn't try to bite you back. And it's fairly nutritious. And the more nutritious it was, the more you're going to come in. Eventually, flowers hit upon the trick of making the insects do your work for you. You no longer had to disperse vast amount of pollen into the wind. Something else will come along. It's going to eat some of it, but the trade-off is great because it's going to go and spread that around as well. And if you're all blooming at the same time, if all your sisters are blooming at the same time, then you're guaranteed to cross-pollinate. Most people think of bees as honeybees, and honeybees really are the most eusocial, the most highly social bees. They're like ants that never lost their wings. They have huge families that are persistent. They're the only group that does that. Most of them hit this primitively social group, or even more so, the solitary bees. So each of those little andrinas that come out, or the Calides once they come out, it'll be one single mama trying to make her way in this world. And she's got a lot of work to do. Primitively social ones, there are some really common ones here. Halictus ligatus is one of those, where one female becomes dominant. She may be the biggest one. She just might be the most aggressive one. We don't really sure, but it's hormonal in some way. Think of a wolf pack or a family of fox or something, where you've got one breeding female and a bunch of sisters or a bunch of daughters or something. But this was all one brood. So one of the sisters becomes a breeder. The rest of them help. And you think now you've got a small family that can gather more resources and put out more eggs. There's an advantage to that. There's an advantage to everything. That's why we have all of these things. I mentioned the Calides early on, and this is Calides inequalis. It's a cellophane bee, and they're nesting in the ground here. They're emerging. This yard where I took these pictures, there's a few of them emerging. They're a little bit late this year because of this cold snap we had. They didn't want to come out when it was that cold, but they'll be out soon. Usually they're all over the pussy willows and the maple trees, but we'll see what they find this year.
Which species?
This is called Calides. It's a family Calides. This is Calides inequalis. It looks very much like a bumblebee, but a lot hairier. Like a honeybee, rather, but it's a lot hairier. And then once you start looking at it, you see some more differences. But they dig a single shaft down a couple of feet into sandy soil, and I'll show you in a little bit here how they set the cells apart. But they'll all kind of collect in one site because it's nice sandy soil. This is the only yard in the neighborhood that was filled, I guess, with sand at some point for some reason, and it's just a perfect spot for them. The older retired woman who lives there, I asked her if I could take some pictures and some video in the yard of her bees, and she goes, "Oh, I love my bees." I'm like, thank you. They're not wasps, and even if they were wasps, they'd be fine. I don't want to go over a whole lot here, but we'll say the pollen is the food source for the bees. That is where they get all their protein, all their minerals, everything else to turn into new bees. The nectar there's a little bit of nutrition there, but mostly that's sugar. And each of these bees is, if you think of a honeybee cell, it's got the nectar in there. They put the food in it. And all the other bees do the same thing. They make a little cell, a little capsule, or even just a spot where they're going to collect pollen, collect nectar and pollen, and move along. Some of them will have more than one generation per year. The little Seratina, they're tiny twig nesters. They're active year-round, so they're going to come out now. I've got raspberry canes in my garden, and I think about 30% of those canes have nests in them. They like twigs, so what we do in our yards, we prune our shrubs back. We make tons of twigs. So these bees are really happy. You'll see them.
Who's nesting in your cave?
Those are the Seratina. Yeah.
They'll do that in the fall.
Good to know.
Yeah, they'll do that all year long. But if
So you're
you,
cutting your canes earlier in the season to get them to do that?
I cut my canes, when you're supposed to cut raspberry canes, as soon as you're done harvesting the fruit, you cut them back. And they will nest in the ones that die. So you'll always lose some canes.
Right.
Yeah. And I had gathered, when I first saw them, I was out there pulling out my dead stock. And I started seeing holes in them. I'm like, well, something's in there. And within days, I saw them emerging out of there. It's like, okay, well, I do nothing right now. And even now, what I do with the canes is I'll cut the canes down at the base and I'll put them in a little container off to the side so that they can emerge and then find somewhere else to nest.
So are they doing that over winter, or are they doing that at some other time during the year?
So when the Seratina nest, because they're multivoltine, they produce multiple generations per year. So that first nesting, and I've got a picture on the next one. We'll just go through this real quick, then I can actually answer those questions. The bees overwinter in different strategies. Most of your solitary bees, all your solitary bees, that whole batch of adults, most of them they've developed in the previous year. So they're just in a state of diapause. They're just waiting through the winter, burning essentially zero energy. And there are some species that can do that. They can stay in diapause for multiple years. Zizia andrina is a specialist for Zizia, golden Alexander. And if there's some environmental cue that they use to know that there's specialized Zizia in bloom or available, so it's probably a root hormone or something like that. And they can wait for a few years until that's a good spot for them. Then they'll emerge. That's unusual. Most of them have to get out, find some food, find some place to nest, and start over again. Those Calides are univoltine. So the ones that are coming out now have about 4 to 6 weeks as an active adult to get it all done. And then they wait for next spring.
Like the mason bee.
Yeah, they are very much like the andrinas are mason bees, and yeah. So most bees nest in the ground. 70% of the bee species nest in the ground. They dig their way in. Other ones are cavity nesters. Sometimes they'll find a little spot in some rocks. They'll go under tree bark, that kind of stuff, and make nests there. So it's a wild, wild variety of stuff.
How far down are they?
Generally, they're going to try to get down beneath the frost layer. So down 18 inches or so. Some of them, like these Calides, have really long nests. They can be like 3 feet down. So she's got to dig down in there, get all that stuff out, and yeah, or pack it down. And then she just makes a single layer. I'll show you that in a second here.
But some are like a quarter of an inch.
Yeah, some of them are just on the surface, or some of them are just in some rotting wood. Like a lot of the halictes, those tiny green bees you see, they're down under rotting wood bark. There's predators galore. It's a risk they take, but they do that. Yeah, and some of them in tussocks of grass and things like that too. So it's a pretty wide variety. If you think of where the paper wasps, like the German paper wasps, nest anywhere, some of them are like that. They'll just find a good spot. Here's a couple of nesting ideas. This is Xylocopa. This is the big carpenter bees. You see, maybe they're nesting in your deck or an old fence or something like that. That's what it looks like. So she bored this tunnel in and then lays an egg or gathers resources, puts in the resources here, lays an egg on them, and makes a little plywood or paperboard separator. And then each time, boom, 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 boom. And they're multivoltine. those big paper, those big carpenter bees, they're going from the spring to the fall, but it's not the same group. It's generation, generation, generation. This is a leaf cutter. It's a megachyle, big lip. They make these little sections of leaf. So if you ever in your garden and see almost perfectly circular holes cut out of leaves, that's a leaf cutter bee that's cutting these little things, and they paste them together into a capsule, and that's what they put their young in. This is the Seratina. This is in a cane. I didn't get this picture. Actually, I didn't take any of these pictures. A friend of mine did. She stepped on a twig and then noticed that it was full of bees. So she took a picture. Some of them are dead. Some of them aren't. See that guy? That one made it. This is a bumblebee nest. See, they make these little cups of nectar and pollen, and that's where they lay the larva in, the egg and larva, and they all manage it. So they manage it as a team. They'll go through the whole season. So they're univoltine, but there's multiple generations of those bees per season. So the first ones, they wear themselves out. Each of these insects do. They last about 4 to 6 weeks. But she's got sisters who will take over after her. And just like the honeybee, the bumblebees have specialties. So early on, for the first couple weeks, that's when they're exuding this wax. So their job is maintaining the wax. They make a roof over their hive, and they may tear it off if it gets too hot, and they may rebuild it and tear it off again. And they're making these cups as well. So the female bumblebee, the queen that came out, and I think I missed talking about this. Nope, it comes up next. All right. And this is your mining bees, your mason bees, even your Calides, these sort of things. The Calides would just have a single shaft. Some bees will share it. So there may be multiple females using the same entrance, but having condos off the side of it. This might be her, and she's got 20 young ones here, just as a single. Having multiple females sharing one spot does give you some protection against parasites, because there are parasitic bees that will come in and lay their eggs in your nest, and if they can even be like the bumblebee parasites, they can even kill the queen and take over. Most of them just are like cuckoos. They call them cuckoo bees. They lay an egg in there and they leave. Let someone else do their work. But it is interesting, if you see a fair amount of these parasitic bees around, you know the population of the bees that they're parasitizing is a pretty healthy population. Otherwise, you won't see them. Bumblebee biology. This is a linear thing. So right now, these queens are waking up. They've been hibernating in a state of diapause over the winter. They may be under the ground a little bit. They may be under some leaves. Wherever they decide is a good place to put their hibernaculum. It's a gamble. Everything's a gamble. But they wake up, they got to find a nest site. They got to fuel up. So you'll see these. They're big. They're all big, and they look really beefy because they've got a huge fat layer to make it through the winter. And they're fast, and they don't have time for anybody. So they're going to go along. Chasing them is sometimes a fool's errand because they're faster than we are. That's for sure. Although they'll start checking out holes. I've had them check out my compost bin holes because, maybe that's a good spot to go in. They look at it, then they realize it's not, and they go off somewhere. But usually they're looking for rodent nests, so mouse holes. I've had them in the yard, the bombus impatiens. I'll be mowing along, and all of a sudden bees will start coming up, and I just mark that spot, mow around it for the rest of the season, let them do it. They like under stumps, old stumps, where the wood's decaying and mice have been living in there and such. So she's got to go in there. She's got to check that area out. And hope there's not a shrew or something living in there that takes objection to this. And then set up shop. Nature did a great episode. If you ever have a look for the Nature episode on bumblebees, it's really good.
Is that
Great
the one
film
where
work.
Where the queen kicks the mouse out?
Yeah, Yeah, just annoyed the mouse out of its own hole. So it goes both ways. And the queens are big. I can see that being a possibility. So she gathers the resources for the first batch of daughters. So she's busy for a couple of weeks. She is stockpiling. She's making those little cups, filling them with honey, gathering pollen balls and all that. And then she'll lay a few eggs. And she'll incubate those eggs. She'll keep them warm. She'll make sure they all get enough food. And when that first batch is done, that first 6 or 8 bees or whatever is done, then she doesn't leave the nest, or very rarely would leave the nest. She then manages the nest, just like your honeybee model. And the workers go out and do that bit. Through the season, she decides when to lay eggs and when not to. She decides what sex the new bees will be. Bees employ a haploid. A lot of insects employ a haploid model. So an unfertilized egg will hatch as a male with one copy of the DNA, one copy of the genes. A fertilized egg will hatch as female with an XX. So it's an XO model, they call it. Late in the season, she has to decide whether she's going to make new gynes or not. If it's not a very successful colony, she won't spend the resources on new gynes. Gynes are unfertilized but fertile females. So she'll just do males. If that queen dies, the workers can lay eggs. On some of them, like Bombus affinis, it's a very big colony. Some of those workers can lay eggs as well. If the queen finds those eggs, she will kill them. But those eggs from an unfertilized worker will be males. So there's a lot of males out there, and they're often pretty easy to find. I've got some pictures of that coming up. The end of the season, they mate. The gynes and the males mate, and then it starts all over again. So the fertilized finders need to find a hibernaculum, and the males are done. So if they get a chance, they're going to disperse. So males come out, they're going to go each direction. That's really the method by which the population of bumblebees disperses. So important resources. It's really important to have appropriate flowers and nesting sites. But these are some spring flowers. Actually, the horse nettle down here is not a spring flower. That's kind of a summer flower. But these are coming up now. Shooting stars, Baptista will come up. Even maples are a very important source of nectar. Not so much of pollen, but they need nectar. So you get the butterflies that are coming out this time of year. I've seen some admirals out. Which ones do you have out?
Admirals.
Admirals?
Agreeing with you.
Yeah, red admirals are early. Morning cloaks are a little bit later, but not too much far behind. Pink ladies. These overwinter down under your leaf litter as adults in diapause over the winter time. So it's important not to clean up too much. Otherwise, you're just throwing all these insects away. Dutchman's breeches and this horse nettle are both, they both require buzz pollination, where the honeybee can they detach their wings from their muscles and they can actually vibrate their whole body. You can do it like with a tuning fork too. And you can see this looks like a tomato, and the fruit from this is a little toxic tomato. But you'll see this out there, and it's a really good plant. Dutchman's breeches, same way. They rely on those queen bumblebees. A few others at that time of year might be out there available to buzz pollinate. Other bees can do it. Not all of them can do it. But certainly as early as Dutchman's breeches is out, they're waiting for the queens. Go a little bit on identifying bumblebees real quick, because they pretty much from the side just look like a big ball of fuzz, right? They're big hairy bees. But at least they're big bees. From Bee Spotter, out of University of Illinois, you can get all of these resources. You can print them out if you want or use them. And Bee Spotter exists to gather citizen science information. So they try to make it as easy as they can, and then they'll have it checked. It may take a while. Be patient, because they're relying on their grad students or professors to do it. These are not all the bees we have in the area. These are just the most common ones. Did somebody have a question?
Well, I just wanted to, you to explain the difference between Graciolis and Aphanus.
Right. I've got some slides coming up showing how the differences there. But what this does is it gives you the basic information. There's color information on the head, there's color information on the thorax, and on the abdomen. And if you can get really good pictures that show you the wing vein pattern as well, that's great. These are some of my entries over the last couple of years in no particular order, but it shows you can come back in, you can see everybody's public information. You can see what I thought it was and what it really was. Occasionally it's not right, like Maculatus was not. Some of them can be confusing. You can get data out of maps for that. So these are the Bombus affinis sightings as of whatever day this was. It was November, so that was the entire season on bee spotter in our region. Well, required people to actually put it up. The stuff you want to look for if you're going to get out there and take pictures. This is about how to tell if it's a male or not. If you can get a good enough picture to count the antenna segments, that tells you. The eyes are huge though, all the better to see you with. The antennas are longer, all the better to hear you with. They're generally hairier. They generally have a white clypeus. So some of them even, like the Andrinas, have a big bushy mustache on them, and the females don't. Males generally are hairier for the same reasons males of any species are hairier. And on bumblebees, they don't have the same pollen collection system. For species identification, you want to get the mohawk, the little tuft, the pattern on the abdomen, and the pattern on the thorax as well. Size is important, but size is variable. A queen can make multiple sizes of daughters. If she feeds them less, they're smaller. If they feed them more, they're bigger. A bigger bee can travel farther, but a bigger bee cannot handle the higher temperatures. So a larger body radiates less heat than a smaller body does. So it's an advantage for a bumblebee queen to produce multiple sizes. Bumblebees, just like honeybees, they collect on this big pollen and nectar basket here. So this is Bombus graciocolus. If you notice back here on here, Bombus affinis has 2 yellow segments, but one of those yellow segments is a half moon of brown. In graciocolus, it's 1 yellow with a half moon, usually brown. Sometimes the queen's not brown. So when I'm looking at that, I can see a very clear half moon here for Bombus affinis. I also got a good shot of the wing, which really does help. In graciocolus, a lot of times they're darker, but this is a pretty good shot of that. The other thing is that graciocolus is a very early species. Bombus affinis queens are out really early, but their colony doesn't peak until later on. Where graciocolus, their colony peaks earlier in the season. It's rare to see them into September. They're pretty much done by August. Yeah. And here's another one. Bombus rufocinctus is pretty common in our area. It wasn't all that common a decade or so ago, so they may be moving over this way, maybe taking some of that space that was left open. They're little butterballs. They're kind of really round. They got a round head. They got a round body. And they're highly variable. So if you see this is a good identification. But if it's all yellow, it might be rufocinctus as well. And again, this is the shot from earlier where you can see the kind of half-half for the affinis. So those are the ones I got last year. The 3 locations I found them last year. This is it in my neighborhood here. It's some males on Joe Pye. It's important also to say that bumblebees fall into various groups, but one of them is tongue length. So Bombus affinis has a short tongue. So it's going to compete with honeybees for the same types of flowers, shallow flowers. And that's what it's doing here on Joe Pye. It's just nectaring up. They were sleeping on this for As long as this Joe Pye was blooming, those males were out there sleeping on it. It was kind of fun. At Dixon, I was a part of the BioBlitz down there at Dixon at the Waterfowl Refuge, and we had them there, and at Fermilab. Some of the other common ones you'll see, Bombus impatiens is the most common in the fall. I like this shot because it shows you a male bumblebee on patrol. When he thinks the females are out, the gynns are out, they're watching. I've seen bumblebees chase goldfinch off compass flower. It's like a crow chasing a hawk. It just kept bang, bang, bang until it was out and then straight back to the same perch. So he's watching. There's everything about that body language tells you. And then this is the other way you find males. It's late afternoon, the gynns aren't out, and it's not happening today, so he's just going to tuck it in. They kind of bite onto the leaf with their mandibles and go to sleep. So if you're out in your garden, get down and have a look and see what's clinging underneath.
It almost like he's clinging with his
Yeah, his feet will do it, but I've seen him just hanging by the mandibles too. If it got windy and it was not enough for their hook type feet, that jaw was clamped tight. Then in the morning they'll crawl out to the top and dry out because usually they're pretty wet from the dew. Bombus fervitus is a fun one because it's super yellow, and these guys can be lemon yellow to golden yellow. And they're pretty common. They're out early on, and this is on a prairie clover, which is a great little plant for them. I see more stuff on prairie clover and lead plant than anything else, more of the unusual bees. So I'm glad to see when people are planting more and more prairie clover, the yellow or the white or the purple.
What was the other plant?
Lead plant.
Ah.
Yeah, I see a lot of interesting, rare stuff on lead plant. But I also see it on field clover, so, nectar is nectar. Well, that's not true. There are a lot of flies that mimic bees. You've got this Bombilidae, a Cystoicus fly. It feeds like a hummingbird. Got this long proboscis. They don't fold up like a butterfly's, but they hover around. If you've ever seen the big sphinx moths, same thing. But these guys are like, 3/4 of an inch long. And these two are, those are a couple predatory flies. These two are. These are a couple of robber flies that look like bumblebees. Ironically, they're probably more dangerous than the bumblebees to most of the other insects out there. Some other confusing bees you'll see out there a lot. These are a couple of the leaf cutters, a couple of big showy ones, male and female. That's the male. Some of the andrinas can look like small bumblebees. Some of them can almost be the size of some of the bumblebees. And this is a late season andrina. And then the melosodias you'll see a lot too. I just like that shot because I rarely see bees turning their heads. They all can, but I rarely get a picture of them. I'm not sure which way he's looking. Threats to them. So why is Bombus affinis endangered? The biggest thing is habitat loss. Like everything else, it's habitat loss. Industrial agriculture is a desert for them. It's worse than a desert. It's toxic. Population crashes. It was once a really common bee, but once your population crashes, it's very difficult for those isolated spots to get back together again. Viruses, mites, some of these are invasive. When greenhouse tomato growers came over from Europe, they wanted to bring over some European bumblebees. And the USDA said no. Finally, they said no about something. So the Europeans took some of our bumblebees back there, worked with them, and then brought them back. We're like, that's no different. So they brought some invasive mites with them in this. And since bumblebees can get through small spaces, they made it out and passed the mites along. So it was a half a success story. We got the idea, but we didn't get the follow through. Global warming is interesting. Bumblebee territories aren't moving north. They're compressing from the south. That's dangerous because you can get then a very thin strip and you don't have a nice broad range. And one of its sister species, Bumble franklinii, might actually be extinct. Robin Thorpe has been looking for franklinii for a couple of decades now and has yet to find them. And this is a sister species of Aphinus, so it shares some of the same physiological threats. The Nosema bombi is the introduced mite. Seems to be very bad for this group of bumblebees. Some of the other ones, not so much. But I want to say, though, is that endangered doesn't mean extinct. Endangered means there is still hope. We're not going to list Bombus franklinii as endangered because it is probably extinct. And there are things we can do about it because they are here. I'll show you some of those maps. I'm going to let this map sit here for a moment because there's a lot of information to digest on it. So historical ranges were drawn from observations. Pre-26 observations are in black. Observations from 2006 to 12 were in the red spots there, and then citizen science information really starts to take over since 2012. And the rest of these are just unrelated Bombus notes. Now there's bias. There is sampling bias to any map like this. The West Coast has a lot of places. The East Coast has a lot of places. Around towns have a lot of places where people are actually getting out there and looking for bees. Right? They're not looking for bees in the middle of in just the rural farm areas as much as they are toward the cities. So you got central Illinois here with Urbana and Springfield and such. But does anybody, I can talk about it too, but does anybody want to make a comment or something about this? What trend you see? Yeah.
Moving up. If you're starting from the east, they're going upwards.
Right, so you've got a northward motion, and that's that effect from warming maybe, that we get a consolidation. And that would be consistent with other species
And
that we
it
see.
would also be the agricultural areas are beneath there. There's a heavier, the states with the high agriculture.
Right.
There's not a lot there for them.
Yeah, so that development and higher intensity agriculture in those areas. And that's where I see here, we see the northern, Midwestern, upper Midwestern cities are where, now that could be sampling bias, but there's a lot of people out there looking for a lot of stuff. And I can assure you there are still people out east that are looking for bumblebees. They're just not finding Aphinus. So the cities could be, because they're not intensively farmed, the city and suburban areas could be a haven for this sort of species. And certainly as we plant more flowers and plant more native stuff in yards and pay attention a little bit more and start to clean up the woods, it'll be even better. Oop, I duplicated a slide. Okay, so this is another one. This I just got this morning off the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's range map. And it shows you the same thing. Red is where they have the highest zone, and you can't collect in those areas without permits. In yellow, it's likely that they're there. They think it should be in these blue areas, but they're not finding it. So it's the same information, just put out a little bit differently. Let me go back to that. Some challenges for Bombus Aphinus' recovery, we've already talked about a lot of them. The fragmented populations is a big one. Essentially, if those males can't find a mate by dispersing, you're not going to have a population that spreads. Larger colony size, Bombus Aphinus has 200 workers roughly active at the same time, over 1,000 in a very successful colony throughout the season. Those are huge, and that takes a lot of territory, it takes a lot of resources. And since they're short-tongued, they're competing directly with honeybees for the same sort of resources. And they're notorious, it's really hard to find their nests. come back to this one. This is, I got these slides out of order. I apologize for that. This is a pair of maps showing expansion of one of the neonicotinoid pesticides from, when was that, 95 to now, to 2012, when that data was collected. So it has been massive. But I'd like not to fool people that that is the only pesticide threat. Neonicotinoids are neurotoxins that are designed to work at the insect neuron level. It's pretty much, it doesn't affect anything bigger, so a mammal's not going to be affected by it. But insects, it is fatal for insects. And this is what we're dealing with. So if you look at kind of the upper Midwest area, you see it's just barely in that little slice zone here that is not as intensive, where we're seeing a lot. And those are the cities.
So what are some of the brand names of that?
The agricultural brand names, I honestly don't know. I should learn those.
Triage is one. It correlates a lot with the emerald ash borer and the use of imidacloprid to on ash trees to try to save ash trees. In part, what's going on there.
So not, in the using it to help stave off emerald ash borers is perhaps using the same areas where you'd get nesting sites.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and it, they shoot it in triage is shot up into the vascular system.
Right.
But imidacloprid can be administered into the soil.
Yeah, and we're getting, most of this is the seeds are pre-coated. Plants are treated before they're actually put into the ground, so it stays in the plant. And that's the biggest use for the neonicotinoids. And it's been brilliant for that type of farming, but it's deadly. Because they're collecting pollen that is essentially got a pesticide in it.
It's awful.
Yeah. So the things we can do, I'm sure this is no news to any of you. It spread the word. It's more native plantings. Yeah, this is us. We can make this work. We can, in these cities here, in the Chicago area, Minneapolis, Minnesota, all that. This is where this species is going to live or die. And it'll be up to us planting and maintaining and not treating the hell out of our yards and such. And make sure the villages know when you see them plant it. Carpentersville, I live out in East Dundee, and Carpentersville did a great job planting the right kind of flowers along the river. And it's been really nice. They didn't do such a great job weeding, but they're starting to. So make sure they know that. That it's observed and that it is the right thing to do.
And just the thing about plants being pre-treated with neonicotinoids, the big box stores like Lowe's and Home Depot, if you buy plants from places like that, check and make sure, because it's on the label.
Right. It is supposed to be labeled whether the plants are treated with neonicotinoids or other, but mostly the neonicotinoids because they're very pervasive. And buy the stuff that's not. And ideally, you're not looking for highly hybridized plants as well. If nothing is eating it or visiting it, then it doesn't stay in my yard. The advantage of a plant that is never eaten by anything means that there's something wrong and it doesn't belong in the environment. Because if you think of the stuff that eats your plants, you get tent caterpillars or something like that. They look terrible, they're horrible, but I've told friends, wait and watch. Watch those orioles come in and just eat all those tent caterpillars. Those are new orioles right there in that ugly mass of netting. Tell your neighbors, be happy. Be happy when you see stuff, even wasps. I've left some books up here. You're welcome to have a look at them. I've brought my cameras along. Welcome to play with those if you want. A couple good ones out here. This is a fantastic new book Heather Holm put out. It gives you not just a good basic primer on the bees, but also on the plants that you can use in your yard and what sort of things those plants support. So is it a host plant for stuff? You know, if you've planted dogwood, what kind of butterflies or moths are going to eat it and make new butterflies and moths? This one is a free online publication. This is a great book. It's, to my knowledge, the first of its kind for kind of a general public level of a bee encyclopedia for North America. There's about 24,000 species of bees worldwide. Around 4,000 of them are in North America. About 400 of them, by the latest census, in the northern Midwest Great Lakes area. Some of them are desert specialists, so you're not going to see them until a super bloom out in the desert. But a lot of them you'll see in the yard. Some of them are super common, but you'd be surprised. Stuff shows up. I was grilling 2 years ago, and we've got this old rose bush that came with the house. It's an old tea rose that will not die. So we finally accepted it's not going to die. And I'm grilling along, and there's a cane that was cut. And I notice a bee just goes right to it, goes down inside, and then some more sawdust comes out of it. I'm like, oh, what are you? So I go inside, get my camera, and get a couple good pictures, and it's a hoplites. It's another one of these little megachiles that are kind of the leaf cutter area. And they're just making these little nests in each of these little rose twigs. And they may fit 2 or 3 down in there. They can't really get down too far into it, to a joint. But that's good enough. 2 here, 2 there, 3 there. And that's great for that little bee. But if you cut all those dead canes down at the end of the season and throw them out, there go all the bees. So give them a chance. Just give them a chance. This is a little deeper dive into bumblebees, and this is another great one, just a general pollinators information. There's a lot of stuff out there, and they're not really designed for entomologists, so they're pretty approachable. They give you what you need to know. Other resources online, again, Bee Spotter. If you want to start taking pictures of bumblebees, submit the data, please. Xerces Society has a great whole section of information on the Bombus affidus and other stuff. So does the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who are managing the response and the information about our natives, our endangered species response. Bug Guide is good. Discover Life. You know, it's all out there. I think this is the last slide. Thanks. I have tons of pictures online. Take one of my cards. Most of my stuff is up on Flickr. You can just dig through it. I'm fair at organizing stuff. I'm not great, but they're in albums that are easily enough seen. So I've got like an album for 2018 at Fermilab and each of the years at Fermilab, and I've got organized that way. It's by location.
But they're beautiful. He won't say it himself, so I'm for him. He's a fantastic photographer, and you really get a very clear idea of what the bees look like. And there are bees that you wouldn't think are bees, because you think of bees as honeybees and bumblebees, but they're all different kinds, and he's got them.
Yeah, I've got presentations on that too, just all these different ones. There's tons of these tiny green bees, tiny black bees. When summertime comes around and all those asters, all the sunflowers and stuff, there are specialists for those sunflowers. There are the Melisodes. They're the longhorn bees. The males have antennas that are almost the length of their body, so they're easy to see. The females usually don't stick around as long. They're busy, but a lot of them are gorgeous too. And a lot of those are very different. The male and female look pretty different, which is unusual for a lot of insects that aren't like butterflies that are big, showy, see you across the field sort of insects.
You said the queen decides the sex of
Yes.
her offspring. So what usually might be the ratio of the sons to the daughters?
Yeah, so on all bees, a queen decides which sex egg to lay. So when you're thinking about that Seratina that was laying in the nest in the stick or something, the females are going down first. She's going to lay the next batch of females first because they're more important. Males can mate with more than one female. Females can mate with more than one male. But you always want to make sure you have your females first. And then if she's got, say, 10, what I gather is like 3 will be males. And that's kind of general. And they decide whether to fertilize the eggs or not as they're laying them. But there's a lot of animals that do that store the sperm for a year. Yes?
Comment, I have a question. Comment is there's a really great podcast called Pollination from the University of Oregon. If you're interested in hearing more, there's a couple years of content you can look through. It's really, really great. And then I'm curious, do bumblebees, are they affected by the Varroa destructor mite?
Yeah, so the first comment for the videotape as well is that there's a good podcast out of University of Oregon called Pollination. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, and the destructor mite, I think so. I don't think as badly. I think Alan was asked this at the Wild Things conference, and he goes, that isn't the biggest concern for them. It can, but I think it's more preference to honeybees, and that's how it gets transported around. And that's another problem with honeybees is they get transported around. Yes?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about the insecticides.
Yes.
The neonicotinoids. There's about 7 or 8 of those neonicotinoids out, and they're always developing more. You have to go online and see the chemical name, and it'll tell you what it is, a neonicotinoid. There's chemical names, and then there's brand names. The brand name is what you're going to see on the bag of Grub-X or Merit. There's just brand names, so they are very destructive, and you have to do a little research when you go and buy the chemicals.
Right.
Because a lot of them are put on the ground in the flowers,
Oh, yeah.
and they last for 3 to 6 months.
Right.
So
Yeah, those persistent granules that are used to keep your...
Grub-X.
Yeah, Grub-X. Yeah, Grub-X. People wonder why you don't see fireflies anymore. This is why you don't see fireflies anymore. A larvicide kills insect larvae. So beetles are in your yard, flies are in your yard, bees are in your yard, all kinds of stuff. Everything lives in the ground. If you can provide some open space that's not mulched to hell, because they can't get through that, that's where you see a lot of bees nesting. So you'll see it in parks under like a park bench. You'll see andrenas nesting there. People will say, oh, they're wasps. And just please tell them they're not wasps. They're good wasps. No, you can even say with the wasps that we like to have, there's a species of scolid wasp, the Scolid dubia, a blue-winged wasp, that actually will lay its eggs in Japanese beetles. They prey on scarabs. And I was surprised to find that they actually will go after these invasive ones too. So that's not always the case.
Do these bees sting?
Very, very few bees sting. Or some of them can. Bumblebees can sting, but you really got to rough them up a little bit for a bumblebee to sting you or step on it. Not all bees do. So male bees don't sting at all. The stinger is an ovipositor, an adapted ovipositor. So male bees won't. Some of them may have a primitive ovipositor, but it's rare. And a lot of them don't even have an opportunity to sting. They don't have the venom. So and most of them don't really want anything to do with you. Most wasps don't want anything to do with you either. If you've got paper wasps or something up in the eaves, and we all do that, there's 2 invasive species of paper wasps, German and European paper wasps. They are 99.5% of all stings. And don't feel bad about getting rid of those guys because they're not native anyway. The best thing to do is if there's a nest like up in an eave or something, early in the morning on a cool summer morning, you can knock it down then because they're going to not be very active at that point of the day. But if it's a big like bald-faced hornet's nest right by your door, then probably call somebody. I've been out in the field years and years and years out there with the hornets and wasps and the ones that potentially can get nasty with you, and I've never been stung. Which means this year I'm going to be hospitalized after getting stung by Yeah, the bald-faced hornets are pretty cool. They're voracious predators. They're amazing. Some of the other wasps, like the golden digger wasps and those huge black ones, the black Sphex pennsylvanicus, they hunt katydids. Their prey is that big. I have yet to get any video of that happening, but I have a friend who did. Yeah. Anybody else with questions?
Is there a grub killer that is safer than anything you put on your lawn to get rid of the June beetle larva is going to kill anything that's in there?
Yeah, is there a safe grub killer? I don't know the answer to that. Maybe somebody here knows. I know there's stuff like nematodes or something like that they've been playing with, but I don't know.
About milky spot?
Milky spore.
Milky spore?
It's a bacteria.
Okay.
Actually, and they are parasitic on certain larvae.
That may have been what I heard about. The
Japanese
milky spore,
beetles
yeah.
particularly.
Okay, I don't know how that reacts to other
It
things.
takes a while to establish though, but once it does, it's pretty effective.
Oh,
You continually apply it.
so it has to be reapplied every so often. Yeah, and I don't know how much it does kill other stuff either.
What is killing my caterpillars? Is it a wasp or a bee?
It would be a wasp. Bees are not predatory or some bees are parasitic to other bees. But yeah, there's a lot of wasps that hunt caterpillars. And so they're very often very small wasps, but not always very small wasps. And they just cut right in, lay the egg, and off they go. So that's part of life. If we have enough hosting plants for the caterpillars, then it's not a problem. But when you start running short on territory, it becomes a problem. Anybody else? No? All right. You got a meeting?